I hope you all love that great hymn too, Higher Ground. Hadn't heard it till before we started Charity Baptist Church, and we were kind of online with Temple Baptist Church, and they would sing that quite often, and a great hymn. I want to read verse 3. It says, I want to live above the world, though Satan's darts at me are hurled. For faith has caught the joyful sound, the song of saints on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland. A higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. And I hope that that's what you want to be about in your life, is growth in the Lord, and that we can be on higher ground every day. Every step that we take, growth to the Lord. I hope that. I think it's going to kind of go maybe a little bit with the messages and stuff that we're going to look at here this morning. It's really one message broken down into two parts. The first part here, right now before we eat, and then we'll go and break and have a fellowship lunch together, and then we'll come back and get the second part of that. So it's all the same, but the Lord's just been leading me over the last several weeks and stuff to take. I've mentioned these before in some teaching that we've done, but I really want to look at the offerings in the Old Testament. And it's going to be in the book of Leviticus, starting in chapter 1. And if you don't know where it's at, you should know that it's probably about the third book in the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, the third book. And many of us, I want you to raise your hand if you love to read Leviticus. Most people, when they find the book of Leviticus and they begin to read Leviticus, they move through it very quickly, or when they read it, they say, what on earth does that have to do with me right now? That's all Old Testament stuff. Well, I got to say that it truly is rich in elevating the Lord Jesus Christ and looking at Him in the offerings that Israel did here. And the whole book of Leviticus, we're not going to go right now anyway, or over the next several weeks through the whole book of Leviticus, but it's broken down into two parts. Chapters 1 through 16 deal with the way to God through sacrifice. And then the last part, chapter 17 through 27, talk about the walk with God through sanctification and separation. You know, and we need that in the church today, and that really isn't going on. Separation and sanctification of the saints. And the main teaching through most of Leviticus here is going to be how sin may be put away. Don't you want to know how sin can be put away in your life? I do. Lord, what's going to help me? Well, as we begin to look at some of these offerings, we're going to find the answer to many of those things. There's two great, I'm going to call them great commands that we see in Leviticus as you read through it. And you'll probably pick up on it, even if you've read it recently. They are, be holy and be clean. Be holy and be clean. Two great commands, two great things that we see in this book. Well, who knows? Let me ask a question before I tell you. You might know. How many offerings are there in Leviticus here? There are of these offerings. Anybody know? Anybody want to just shout it if you know? How many? Dick, was that 5 or was it 4? 5. That little, yeah, there you go. That was a little bit better. The little finger was in just a little bit, a little bit on that right hand. So he gave us the left. 5 offerings, and that's exactly right. I say there's 5. There's some people that say there's only 4 because they group the last 2 together, and they say they're kind of the same. But these 5 offerings then are going to be broken down into 2 different groups. The first group is the first three, and they're called the sweet savor offerings. And those three offerings are the burnt offering, the meat offering, and the peace offering. And then the last two, which are the last group, are the sin offerings, and it's the sin offering and the trespass offering. So did you catch all that? No. Hopefully you did. We're going to look at the very first offering of all those five, and it happens to be the burnt offering. As I began to look into the burnt offering, I've got to say, Lord, thank you for the burnt offering. Thank you for the things that we're going to be able to see right here in this offering. We're going to look at it in Leviticus chapter 1. So I'm going to read all of that chapter, verses 1 through 17. So hopefully you can take in some of the things that we're going to read here from the Word, and then we'll try and explain some of them so maybe we can understand it in a greater sense. And the Lord God called unto Moses and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, you shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd, and of the flock. If his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make an atonement for him. And he shall kill the bullock before the Lord, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood round about upon the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. And the sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire upon the altar and lay the wood in order upon the fire. And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall lay the parts, the head and the fat, in order upon the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But his inwards and his legs shall he wash in water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar to be a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet savor unto the Lord. And if his offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep or of the goats, for a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring it a male without blemish, and he shall kill it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord. And the priest Aaron's son shall sprinkle his blood round about upon the altar. And he shall cut it into his pieces with his head and his fat, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. And he shall wash the inwards and the legs with water, and the priest shall bring it all and burn it upon the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet savor unto the Lord. And if the burnt sacrifice for his offering to the Lord be of the fowls, then he shall bring his offering of the turtle doves or of young pigeons. And the priest shall bring it unto the altar, and wring off his head, and burn it on the altar. And the blood thereof shall be wrung out at the side of the altar. And he shall pluck away his crop with his feathers, and cast it beside the altar on the east part, by the place of the ashes. And he shall cleave it with the wings thereof, but shall not divide it asunder. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar, upon the wood that is upon the fire. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor unto the Lord. Did anybody get anything out of that? A whole bunch really in that, an awful lot. And you might, as a first reading of it, why are we reading about sacrifice and killing of animals and blood and guts and all those things? That's really what it was, wasn't it? Well, if you're taking notes, I broke this down into really 3 parts. The first part, we're going to look at the offerings. The second part, we're going to look at the offering of the burnt offering. Now almost saying offering too much, isn't it? And then the very last part that we're going to look at after lunch is the offering typifies consecration in our lives. Consecration. So we're just going to look at the two first parts of this this morning before we break for lunch, and then come back and get that little third part. You'd think that maybe the last part then will be a short message. I hope that it is. I thought that, Lord, that this one's going to be a short message, and we've already been at it for about 20 minutes. Does anybody know that? No, I'm just kidding. I don't know how long for sure we've been going. But we're going to look at the offerings. Did you notice as we went through that there was 3 different groups of offerings? And the offerings were, did you notice, of the herd? That was one. The other one was of the flock, which would be a sheep or a goat. And then the third one was of the what? Which would be a what? Anybody? A fowl. Shelley said a fowl, or a bird. A turtle dove, or young pigeons. And I think if we've been around long enough, we know that these offerings, different levels of them, or we can call different grades of the offering, God has intended from the very beginning, even when He instituted the offerings here, that any person can come to Him. Any person. You see, the herd, the offering from the herd, which would be like the cows, would have to be like a bull. Those were for the people that were well-to-do. Those folks that had a lot of money would have cattle, and they would be able to bring an offering of the herd. A bull they'd have to bring. So that was for those folks that had quite a bit of cash, maybe in their pocket, or a big flocks, whatever they had. And then those that were kind of mediocre, the middle class, we hear this every day, don't we? The upper class, the middle class, the lower class. So that's really the 3 areas that it hits. The middle class then, those folks were able with the money and things that they had to bring of the flock, not of birds, not a fowl. The flock means sheep and goats when there's a number of them. So they would bring of the sheep or the goats. That's what they could afford for their offering. And then those that were of the lower class, or those that might even be the poor, God always would give the ability even for them to come, and they could bring an offering of a turtle dove or young pigeons. We know, as we if we went into the New Testament, we know that Jesus was poor, wasn't He? His family was poor, because when they brought an offering after He was born, it was of the turtle doves and the young pigeons, wasn't it? Showing the class which He was. I thank the Lord that He was poor, but yet that He was rich. Wasn't He? Rich in all things, owned all things. So there's a different grade of those offerings, as we read there in Leviticus 1. Also, another thing to notice from the offering is that it had to be a clean animal. One of the clean animals that God had given to Israel. They weren't permitted to use one of the animals that had to live on the body of another, like a dead body. We know there are fowls, there are birds, like vultures, aren't there, that eat dead bodies of other birds. Or maybe when we went to the museum yesterday, we went over to Buffalo Bill Museum and went through there with Juliet. When we were just getting ready to go, there were 3 ladies that were out there, and each lady had a different bird. One of them had a hawk. What kind of hawk was it? Kyler, do you remember? What was it? A red-tailed hawk. And then there was an owl. What kind of owl was it? Great horned owl. And then there was another bird. What was the one on the very... Remember what Mom was here, she'd probably remember. It was some type of vulture, but it was a little vulture. It was a little one. But all 3 of these fowls ate other animals. The hawk, she was talking about how they would go and go down and eat little mice or whatever they were, how the owl would do the same type of thing and eat different things. But then the vulture generally would eat on animals that were already dead. They wouldn't necessarily go and kill other animals. They didn't have the right talons and stuff to be able to do some of those things. You could see the difference between them. But these here had to be fowls. Like if they're fowls, they had to be clean. They had to be clean animals. So those birds that were offered, like the turtle doves and the pigeons, had to be animals that did not eat, if you want to call it the carrion, or of other. It had to be more of seeds and those types of things that the birds would feed on. And if you think of the animals, either the cows or the sheep or the goats, anybody, well, Dick would probably know this. Do any of the cows out there on the ranch eat other animals? They don't. We feed them grain, grass. How about sheep and goats? Do they eat other animals? They don't, do they? They eat the grass and those types. Those were a part of some of those clean animals. They couldn't eat any other dead animals. They were clean. But not only were they clean, they were more domesticated. They were ones that you could come up close to. I know that growing up, my grandpa always had at least one milk cow. And in his barn, he had this little barn that he built, and he had a milker in there for one cow. He started out milking the cows by hand, and then he got this old system from an old farmer, and he put it to use in his barn, and he'd put that milker on to milk that cow. Well, the very first one he had that I remember being a young fellow was Bessie. Anybody else named a cow Bessie before? Well, it was Bessie, and you could go out and get Bessie, and you'd walk right up, and Bessie'd follow you right up into the barn, hook her up, and milk her. You didn't have to run after her. She didn't run away from you. She just followed you right in there. That was a part about the domesticated animals. They would come right in. They would follow you right up there. They were peaceful. They were tame. You know, that reminds me of our Lord. In what we see, I want to read just one verse from Isaiah chapter 53. Some of you already know what it is in your mind. I know you're thinking about it. Isaiah 53:7 says, "He was oppressed," speaking of the Lord, "and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so openeth not his mouth." Our Lord was led as a sheep to the slaughter, wasn't he? He didn't open his mouth. There was another fellow in the New Testament time. He happened to be an Ethiopian eunuch. He was up in a carriage. He'd been to Jerusalem and he had worshipped. And while he was there, he came back and he was in the chariot and he was reading from the book of Isaiah. And in Isaiah, where he was reading was Isaiah 53:7. And Philip goes up, being led by the Spirit, goes right up in there, doesn't he? Sits with him, and he takes that passage of Scripture, and he expounds to him more fully who Jesus Christ was. Being as a sheep led to a slaughter, willingly going and being led. These animals were clean animals, but they were willing to be led there. Not only were they domesticated, but they had to be without that blemish, perfect. But they were male. They had to be a male, not a female. It was a male that was taken for the offering. You know, the Lord, when he came, he was male, wasn't he? He was not a female, a male. The first Adam, the second Adam, the Lord Jesus Christ. So here we have the offering. We know that it was in grade, the herd of the flock, or of the fowl. You know, the very last book of the Old Testament, Israel was offering offerings that were not permissible. And I want to give you just a glimpse of that in Malachi. If you take a look at Malachi with me, very last book in the Old Testament. Chapter 1 and verse 8. And if you offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? They began to bring animals in this time, Malachi's time, that were not clean animals. They had some defect. These animals right here that they had to bring and offer were perfect without any blemish. There wasn't anything that was amiss or that was wrong with those animals. They were perfect. Perfect. And I hope you're having a little bit of a view of the Lord Jesus Christ as we're looking at these things, that He was perfect, without spot, without any blemish. Now look at the second thing, not only the offerings, but the offering of the burnt offering. There's so much in the offering of the burnt offering. First of all, do you remember when we were reading in Leviticus that it said in verse 3, he shall offer it of his own voluntary will. He would offer it of his own voluntary will. God didn't force any man to come with an offering. He didn't force anybody, did he? It was voluntary. The burnt offering had to be a voluntary offering that you brought before the Lord. We just went through a whole thing on Calvinism. If you look at just even this offering, it was willing. They willingly had to come to the tabernacle to meet the Lord. He didn't force it on anyone. So that was the first thing. It's willing. And when the offerer would come, willingly, knowing if it was of the herd or if it was of the flock, the sheep or the goat, they could lead that offering right up there to the tabernacle. I hope you know what the tabernacle looked like. I'm going to give you a quick picture. In your Bibles, a lot of you in your Bibles have a picture of what the tabernacle looks like. Has anybody got a picture in their mind? They know already what it kind of looks like? Yeah. The eastern side, well, first of all, I want you to think it had like a cord around it, or we might say a wall, or might be built out of what you might say tent-type material, went all the way around the outer walls of the tabernacle that God gave to Moses to build. And they always had to image which side of it? North, south, east, or west? Which side? What, Kyler? East. Through the eastern gate they had to go. So if you think of it here, I'm going to do this backwards because I want to do it the way that I can see it, but then it puts things in reverse for you. So the east to you guys, if you're looking at a map, north is always where? It's always up. Always up. That's Map Class 101, right? North is always up. So north is up. What is on your right then? On your right would be what? East. And on your left would be west, and then in the south. So now you picture that you see right here at the tabernacle. This side for you guys over here is the east, right? And the west is over here, the north and the south. On the eastern side, if you look at a square all the way around, there was a gate that was right here on the eastern side. The offerer willingly would come to the eastern gate. And when he got to the eastern gate, guess who would meet him there? There would be one of the priests that would meet him there. They would take him and the offering and they would lead them through the eastern gate to, there was a, who knows what the very first thing is that you come to inside that eastern gate? What is that called? Anybody say it out loud. It's an altar, but what altar is it? called? Anybody? Brazen. It was the brazen altar right there. The brazen altar. Now, as we go further from east to west, what is the next thing? It was kind of circular. Anybody know what that's called? The next piece of the tabernacle. What is it? Carol, say it. Starts with an L. The laver. The laver, right? The place for washing. So the laver was there. And then we would go into the tent that was set aside that they called, you could call it the holy place. And the first place that you went into was the holy place. So you went through a curtain into the holy place. Remember, going from east to west as we move. And inside the holy place, what was in there? Caleb, you know, you're looking at me. Table of shewbread was in there. It would be on the north side. And then on the south side was what else? No, not the ark. The lampstand would have been on that south side. And then there was another curtain that took you into the Holy of Holies. And right before you went into that curtain, there was another little thing, another little altar. What was it called? What? Say it. The altar of incense. That's where, in the New Testament, when Zechariah, I think it was, John the Baptist's dad, when he came in and ministered, that's where he was at. Was right there at that altar of incense. And then once you went through the other curtain into the Holy of Holies, what was there? The ark, wasn't it? The ark of the covenant, the mercy seat. The mercy seat, which had the cherubs, right, that were overshadowed it. So you got a picture here. But this burnt offering, the offer would come right into the eastern gate to the brazen altar, right there, and the priest would lead them to the north side of that altar. So they'd be on the north side of the brazen altar where they could look at the tabernacle. They could look at the rest of it where they would see the laver, they would see the curtain to go into the holy place, and then beyond that they knew was the Holy of Holies. They knew what was in there, but right here on that north side is where they brought that offering. The willing, voluntary offering that they came to. And what did they do right when they got there? What was the things that they did? The first thing that they did, what did they do with their hands? Sandy said washed them, but they didn't wash them yet. What else? Where did they place their hands? That's the offer. The person that brought the offering, where did he put his hands? On that offering. On the head. So he would put his hands on the head of the offering. That's just what we've read about. He puts his hands on the head of the offering, and he doesn't just kind of barely, he puts his hands on the head of the offering. It's almost like he leans into the offering with the weight of his body onto that offering right there. And you know what that symbolizes? It symbolized the offerer coming and recognizing that whether it was the lamb or if it was a bull, whatever it was that was there, that animal was going to have to die. And it was his confession that because he was a sinner, this one right here was going to have to die in his place. And that's what he recognized when he put the hands on there. If you've been in our Sunday school class that we've been going over the doctrine of the Bible, you understand that the Old Testament, when God used Hebrew, He spoke in pictures. And it was a personal language, wasn't it? So here's a picture. He's given us a picture of Jesus. He is. The offerer leans in to the offering. The one that's going to be offered for him, signifying that one is going to have to die in his place. He's going to have to be slayed. You know something that I always missed when I was reading Leviticus till just recently was this part. Then what the offerer had to do. The offerer had to slay the offering himself. You know, when I've read that for years and years and years, and kind of like, okay, there's not a lot in here, but there is, and you go over it, I thought the priest was the one that did the slaying, the offering. But the offerer that came and brought his offering, he had to slay the offering right there. He had to slay his own offering. And when he slayed it and he cut the neck on it, the blood would come out, and then the priest was there. And the priest would capture that blood. And that priest would take that blood, and if this was like the brazen altar, that priest would take the blood and put it on the altar and around it. It had to be that shedding of that blood. And then did you notice when we were reading that I've always wondered why all this had to happen, the ritual of this picture. Why was it all happening? And then what the offerer had to do after he slayed the animal. Did anybody see the word flay? Remember reading the word flay? When I read through that, we read he'd have to flay the offering. And the flay means actually skin. So he had to take the skin off the offering. And it doesn't say right here, but if you go back into practice and stuff that they did, normally that skin was given to the priest. I don't know for sure why it was, but the priest ended up with that skin. But he had to skin the animal. And then it said he had to cut the animal in what? Pieces. He cut the animal in pieces. And then after he cuts the animal in pieces, he washes the animal. Doesn't he? He washes the animal. And then the priest comes in again after he stoked up the fire on the brazen altar. And he takes the whole burnt offering and he puts it on the altar. And he burns it with fire. And it's a sweet-smelling savor to God. A sweet-smelling savor. That was, all I was talking about there was a herd. But then he gives us a little bit of information if you bring a fowl. It looked like there's a little bit of difference. I'm trying to think of this. The ladies yesterday that had the fowls in the museum, they had this like leather glove on their arm, and then they actually had it hooked around the feet of the fowl and actually kind of chained to their hand, so if it tried to take off a little bit, it wouldn't be able to go away from where they were. And the one lady was standing there when we were looking at the red-tailed hawk. She says, how much, she's standing right here, how much does this red-tailed hawk weigh? And everybody's sitting there. And there's one fellow that was there, he said, how much did he say? How much did he shout? 25 pounds, he says. And I began to think when he said 25 pounds, she's sitting right here holding that bird. I don't think I could sit there with 25 pounds as long as she was holding that bird. So you know that 25 pounds wasn't quite enough. But what did she end up saying? How much did the bird weigh? How much? About 2.5 pounds that she was holding that bird with. So I'm thinking of these willing offers when they bring the fowl. Or do they have it in a sack? I don't think they have it in a sack. If it's one of their domesticated fowls, they're bringing that fowl with them, aren't they? They've got it, right? They're holding on to it. You know that signifying. What are they signifying with that fowl? Just like they were putting their hand on the herd or the flock, this one is going to have to die for me. But they didn't have to actually slay this one. The offerer didn't. They actually handed that over to the priest. The priest, Aaron's son, as it said here. They'd hand that over. And then it says something about, what did the priest do with it? Did anybody catch that when we read that? What did it do with its neck? Wrung its neck. It wrung its neck. It would wring its neck. I remember seeing that. I think I've told you that before. Growing up, my grandpa raised chickens and stuff that he had out there. And I only seen him do it once. But generally what he would do when we would kill the chickens, and then they would go in and they'd have to put them in hot water and stuff to get all the, the feathers off. And it stunk. Carol, you've done it. You know. If you've done that, you know what it smells like, and it's not pleasant. But we would always generally take an axe and hold on to the chicken, and Grandpa would just cut the head off, and then he'd throw the chicken out there, and it would do that. You've seen that without its head on, it'd flop in there a little bit, and then it would just settle down and be done. Well, I saw him do it one time. He took one of them, and he wrung its neck like that, and he wrung the neck, and he actually had the neck, and he threw it, and it went. He wrung the neck off of it. And that doesn't look like a very sane process or a very good process. It looks like it'd be pretty painful to do it. He said they wrung the neck, but I looked up that word, wrung the neck, and it looks like it's wrung, but yet it's not necessarily separated from the body. Other people said, well, yeah, it was wrung all the way off, it was separated, and then the head was put on the altar. Just like the head of the cow and the sheep and the goat were put on there. So I don't know whether or not it was completely separated or not. He wrung the neck, and then it said he took it, and they took it and wrung out the blood on the altar and beside it. And so it wrung out the blood of that offering. You notice it said something on there. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but it said then they would take it and they would take the crop. Who has a place where it says about the crop? What's it say, Brother Kurt? You got it there where it says something about the crop? What's it say?
And he shall pluck away his crop with his feathers.
He shall pluck away his crop with his feathers. Who knows what the crop of a bird is? What's the crop? Skin. Brother Kurt says the skin. Anybody else have anything? What? The craw. The crop. What is that?
That's that's the first part of their digestive process, or the seeds, or the grain, or whatever they eat.
That's exactly it. That's what the crop is. They could call it like part of the stomach, because I don't think they really have a stomach. What is it, a gizzard or something that kind of takes all the stuff? That's why you feed them rocks, right? Or some type of rock that you put out there for them to help grind up all. So the crop is that first, it's right in the neck. It's that first part that's got, like the stomach, that's got all that food in it that goes right there, right first. So they take the crop and the feathers and discard it. But the rest of the bird is there. And it looks like they open it up from the wings, and it sounds like it's split, but yet it's not split asunder. It's not cut in half, but it's split open, and then there is the offering of the turtle dove or the young pigeon. Young pigeons. Well, I began to look, and what I want you to focus in on just this morning, before we get really to the heart of a lot of the meaning, I think, of consecration in this offering. Because this is an offering that means consecration, but we also have to see the first part of it, where you had to identify with the one that was offered, which is a picture of Jesus. What I want you focusing in on, again, is they willingly led the offering, and they came before the tabernacle. Willingly leading. And I want you to be focusing on the Lord, what we read in Isaiah 53:7. That the Lord willingly went there to offer Himself. Didn't He? He willingly. And I ask you, as you're looking at it, have you willingly walked with the Lord to the eastern gate by the brazen altar? Have you willingly been there on the north side? See the picture. Have you been there with Him? Have you placed your hands on His head? Have you? Have you identified with the Lord in placing your hands on His head? And when you do that, you say, Lord, I know that you died or are going to die in my place. And you're confessing your life and your sin, understanding that He physically has to die. I wonder, have you been there? That's why it's a picture. He gave a picture to the Old Testament Hebrew people, didn't He? To have them have an understanding of it. Have you been there and placed your hands on the Lord? And then I ask this. Have you had the knife? You see, the offer had to come willing to slay the offering. He had to slay the offering on the north side of the brazen altar. I've been hunting, and I've shot deer and I've shot elk. And I've had to go up there and cut their jugular and let them bleed out. And that's not too many times. I've learned now a little trick that you wear some rubber gloves. But when I began, I never did that. I didn't know any of that. And you did that. You're going to get bloody. You're going to get blood on your hands. Guaranteed. Probably on your clothes while you were there. They had to slay the offering with their own hands. And I want you to look to Jesus right now. Because this is a picture of the Lamb like we see in Isaiah 53:7. Like we saw that Philip, or I mentioned that Philip, when he went up into the chariot to the Ethiopian eunuch, he explains it to him so he can see it and understand it. That when Jesus was on that cross, right? Do you see yourself this morning with the hammer in your hand? See, the offer had the knife in his hand. Do you see yourself with the hammer in your hand and the nails in the other hand? You see, we say the Romans crucified the Lord. The Hebrew people, the Jewish people offered Him up to be crucified. But you see, He's not truly your Savior until you've got the hammer in your hand and you've got the nails in your hand and you see and you understand that you nailed Him there. You individually nailed Him there on the cross at Calvary. You've got to identify with Him, and you've got to understand that that was you. You had it in your hand, and you did. Not only that, but we can look at the soldier. The soldier, he had the spear, didn't he? And he hit the Lord's side and he bled out. You've got to see yourself holding the spear. You killed the Lord Jesus Christ. Your burnt offering. And that isn't all of it. You see, it wasn't done there yet. Then the offer had to split Him up and cut Him up. He had to cut the offering up. And what was He doing when He was cutting up the offering and was washing the offering? But He was looking through His body to see if there would be anything that would be a blemish. That's why they cut up that offering. I wondered for a long time, why would you cut the offering up? Why would you dissect it before you burn it? If it's a whole burnt offering, skin it, put the whole thing on there and burn it. But no, the Lord says you cut it up into pieces because they were looking through the whole body, through the inwards and everything, to see if there would be any blemish in that offering. If there was a blemish, you couldn't use it. It was of no use. But they would go through the body. And if there was no blemish, you know you can get into an animal. Not very long ago, Chad Miner shot a elk up the North Fork there with a guy that wanted to get rid of him. And he said when he cut it open, the lungs were black. So there was something in that animal that caused the lungs to be black. What was it? I don't know. But it wasn't perfect. There was a blemish, and that's what they looked at. Was there a blemish in that offering? You see, you and I, we've got to see that we nailed him there, but you also got to look at him and dissect him. There was no blemish in the Lord Jesus Christ whatsoever. Perfect, holy, of God, wasn't he? You've got to see and understand that when you offer the offering. That's what the burnt offering did. It was to draw the offerer very first to that relationship with the Lord and see that he was holy without blemish. And then to be holy without blemish, we know he's got to be God, because God is the only one that's holy and without any blemish in him at all, and that he would have to be the offering. What we're going to look at after lunch is how that offering, what it does. We have to be bringing a burnt offering, not like they did in the Old Testament, but a burnt offering for consecration in our lives. We sang the hymn about being higher ground. If you want to go to higher ground, you got to be at the altar, the brazen altar, with a burnt sacrifice. And if we do it, we're going to see how our God can consecrate us in our life. If you've never, I think I know pretty much everybody here. I don't know Juliet very well, but we're getting to know her a little bit more. But if you've never come to the burnt offering, you've never come and seen the Lord Jesus Christ there in the offering, if you've never had the nails in your hand and the hammer in your hand and you never willingly come to offer it, you got to see that Jesus is calling you to salvation this morning. He is. He's calling you to be cleansed. He's the cleanser. He's the one that takes away the sin. And even I want you to think about that offering for just a little bit of a minute. When they were there and they were cutting through it, they were bloody. They had the parts and pieces on them. The Lord identifies with us, doesn't he? See, it's only through his blood shed that cleanses me from all unrighteousness. The blood had to be on the offer as well to show cleansing in his life. We'll look at a little bit more of that as we look on the second part of it. I want to, if we can end this first part this morning, and there's a couple songs throughout the week that the Lord's been putting on my heart, and one of them we sang last week, but I want to sing, if we can, in ending this first part, it's number 117, Draw Me Nearer.